All right, everyone, welcome to the Houston I/O Psychology Community I/O Professionals Virtual Panel on Consulting. First, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Cale Feldstein. I'm a master's student at UHCL I/O Psychology, and I also work at Texas Children's Hospital. I'm the program director for HIOP, and I'm here co-hosting with Bree. She is our president, founder, basically everything else. So, we're an organization that's focused on, basically just spreading I/O knowledge and networking for the Houston area and beyond. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. Today, we're going to have Joel Schwan, Anika Wilson, and Kareem Panton today. And so if there's nothing else, I think I'm going to kick it over to Joel to get us started off.
All right, appreciate it. So first, I'll dive into a little bit about my history, but I'd like to ask the audience, actually, how many of you have actually worked in retail? And you've probably noticed if you have, you've probably noticed patterns in employee behavior, team dynamics, and what makes some locations more successful than others. So my career actually began way back when I was began working in retail, and you didn't think that would be a good actual place to learn about industrial organizational psychology. So I've actually started when I was working at Books A Million, and I noticed how training approaches directly impacted the customer service quality. And I kind of picked that up as I went forward working in HR as well, learning how HR practices affected employee engagement when I was working at Kmart, when Kmart was still around. Who remembers Kmart? So a long time ago. So anyway, it kind of brings it. I learned how people learn and retain their skills. I learned about performance management. I learned about organizational culture, all from working all my years in retail. And I worked in retail for about 15 years before I actually began working to get my psychology degree, which led me into my I/O Psych master's degree. And I kind of realized that the workforce challenges in retail were actually problems that can be fixed with I/O psychology. And that led me to pursue my MA in I/O psychology while working in retail for at least like the last few parts of my retail career before I actually got into HR and then working into consulting, where before that actually recruiting, then consulting, where I kind of work with like big organizations now that kind of help them out with their workforce planning, and I help them out with job analysis and design, systems thinking, performance measurement as well, and change management. The most common thing I work with businesses is change management, helping them implement new programs and contingent workforce ideas for contractors, and helping them understand resistance to change and how to facilitate adoption. And a lot of that all draws back to my retail experience and how that all kind of applies. And then that's kind of what drove my whole passion for workforce behavior and analytics. And that's where I find a lot of my love in like I/O psychology, the human behavior in the work context, but also thinking systematically. And I'll show a little document thing here about a life cycle of pretty much what I do in I/O psychology and how it could be applied if you decide to go into it. So if you can see my screen, I kind of show like employee life cycle. It kind of begins with workforce planning. And in the workforce planning aspect of things, what you can do with I/O psychology is define workforce needs based on organizational strategy, which is basically aligning their goals to the workforce. You can help them understand with the skills gap analysis, which actually is like the biggest thing right now in staffing, is understanding and identifying the current and future skills required for a business to grow and scale, and planning learning initiatives to fill gaps preemptively. And workforce planning is what I primarily focus on, but there are other aspects too, like onboarding. You can include like surveys and check-ins to iterate the onboarding process. That's something I/O psychologists can do really well. Learning pre-start learning modules, providing tools and training to prepare hires before day one is also an awesome aspect to use in consulting with I/O psychology. If businesses sometimes don't understand, once they have a business organized, but they don't always understand the concepts and the different steps to bring on the workforce that they need. And so I/O psychologists kind of can help out with the pre-onboarding aspects, the onboarding, if not the workforce planning itself, and upskilling and reskilling, promotion. Those are all aspects that I/O psychologists can help out from an analytical side and help introduce like leadership programs for potential managers. I've seen other I/O psychologists do it, and I'm actually connected with a lot of them in my network that act as coaches now and development for the workforce. So that is pretty much in a nutshell what you can do. Going at the very end though, exit and engagement is with the workforce is also something I/O psychologists can do, and something I help out with quite often as well. Engagement former employees as brand ambassadors for future hires is something you can do, or structure the process for the companies to do it for themselves to better get knowledge and transfer the positive exits when they leave. So anyway, now that's pretty much the end of my conversation, but that's pretty much my journey and how I apply I/O psychology today.
Hello, everyone. Well, there, I'm Dr. Anika Wilson. I am an I/O psychologist of the doctoral level, and I was not always an I/O psychologist. I'm actually a new I/O. I'm actually an entrepreneur and the owner of a consulting firm. And so my path to I/O was winding. And I'm going to start off with first, Joel, first Kmart. And I got fired because it was when Kmart decided to go big and went bankrupt, and I lost my job. So then I went to J.C. Penney, where I worked for about 3 years. So I never think about retail, about when I'm looking at my career trajectory. When they said first job, I immediately went to corrections after school, after I graduated my bachelor's. So my bachelor's degree, well, first I'll start off, I got a music scholarship for clarinet performance to college. And after 3 years of tooting the clarinet, I decided that I didn't want to do that anymore. And I transferred schools and finished at Florida A&M with a criminal justice degree. And I was the president of 2 criminal justice organizations straight to the Florida Department of Corrections. I spent 10 years, and then I worked in welfare, substance abuse, mental health, and forensic prisons. I also worked in treatment centers in South Florida. And in 2018, while finishing my master's degree, I decided to start my own business. And I had no idea what that meant. So I became a life coach, because what else do you do? Everybody's a life coach. So after working in human services for 20 years, I was like, I have a life coaching business, and I'm going to do all the things that I did as a caseworker in mental health and substance abuse in my own business. It did not work that way. I was finishing my master's in clinical psychology at the time, which then turned to general psychology. And then COVID hit. And I finished my master's in clinical psychology and didn't know what to do. I didn't know whether to get a job, go work for somebody else, or continue to run my business. But I didn't know how to fund my business, keep my business going. At this point, I had started women's conferences, podcasts. I was taking on a few clients, started doing web design. And when I started my Ph.D., I said, well, I'll develop my psychology, because right around then my son got diagnosed with autism. And my advisor said to me, you're going to burn out. So my son had autism, my daughter had functional neurological disorder and was having seizures. And I learned in my 40s that I was neurodivergent. So at that time, my advisor says to me, I said, well, what do I do? I'm not in mental health anymore. I own a company. What I do? He said, psychology. And I said, what is I/O? She started telling me, and the first thing that stuck was leadership development. So when I learned what I/O was, I said, I don't really want to do analytics. I don't want to do statistics. Definitely don't want to do statistics, especially not quantitative. And so when I saw leadership development, I thought back to my the first time I worked in leadership was when I was 14 years old, and I was a date rape counselor. And I realized that I had always been a leader. I said, I had worked in group therapy. I had worked in settings in prison and in DCF and all these different places. And I said, leadership development is what I want to do. And so what I did was I sat and thought of why I quit all the jobs that I quit. And the reason why I quit every job that I quit was manager. It was either discrimination, it was their lack of ability to ideate, I didn't know what exactly it was, but I knew that the only way to change it was to be the change. And so I decided to write my dissertation on Black women leaving corporate to start their own enterprises. And I did a grounded theory study. And everyone said, don't do grounded theory. It's hard. And I said, well, there's no theory that exists to communicate my challenges as a Black female in the workforce. And so I published my dissertation and I am officially a doctor. And so I say all that to say that no matter what you do, you can, everything that you do in your work life or your lived experience relates to I-O psychology. Doesn't matter if it is, if it's communication, if it's data. In my company now, we specialize in artificial intelligence, which is machine learning, which is I-O. We specialize in strategic development. We create curriculums. We work with business owners, and now we are in government contracting. We officially got certified with SBA and are doing government contracts in the state of Florida, state of Louisiana, and federal government. And so what my advice to everyone is, one, divergent. And I'm a non-traditional student. I got my master's and Ph.D. from Capella University. And in SIOP and other places, non-traditional students didn't have a place. And I advocate for neurodivergent learners, for people with disabilities, and for non-traditional students, because there's a path for all of us and it doesn't look the same. So no matter what it is that you want to do, no matter where you are, and no matter what your race, gender, ethnicity, or any of it, there's a place for you in I-O. And I-O is definitely the future, and I'm glad I fell into it. So.
Thank you so much, Anika. Great. You definitely took a winding path into I-O, which we'd love to see. That's incredible. All right, I'm going to kick it over to Kareem, and then when he introduces himself, we'll do the Q&A after. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kale. Good evening, folks. Thanks for joining us. My name is Kareem Panton. I got my PhD from Hofstra University, defended in 2023, I think. So it's been, wow, has it been 2 years? Almost to the day. I didn't realize that at all. But yeah, it's been great hearing from, Anika and Joel as well. My path through I-O has also been kind of interesting. So it's not nearly as strong as it used to be, but you might catch that I have a bit of an accent. Reason being, I'm originally from Jamaica, so I was an international student in the US. So I came to the US planning to be a biomedical engineer. As you can tell, I am not a biomedical engineer. I joke and say that, I hit my math ceiling, but to be honest, my math ceiling hit me. Made it through calculus in college and then decided, hey, I'm not doing this for the rest of my life. So I did what any college student did at 19 years old and switched majors, hoping to still graduate in 4 years, instead of thinking, hey, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? So I went from BME to neuroscience because I could take all of my bio classes, my chem classes, the few calc classes I did. And my senior year, I took a class in neuropsychology. And I was like, okay, this stuff is pretty cool. I can do this at the graduate level and be a neuropsychologist, I guess. Now, plot twist, neuropsychology is more psychology than it is neuroscience. So neuroscience degree it's a bio degree, biology. So I went back home to Jamaica and I did a post-bac in psych. And that's where I learned about I-O psych for the first time. So it was kind of when I was back home around my family doing psych that I was like, okay, let me take a moment and think, is this the direction I want to go? Let me just figure it out right now. And when I told my parents, like, hey, I want to do my I-O psychology, my future in I-O psychology, my dad had no idea what that was. And then nobody knew what that was. My mother was the only one who did. And the reason she knew is because she spent 40 years in HR. So she'd been in the human resource management space for a while. She'd known about I-O psychology for a while. She'd been at conferences with I-O psychologists there, although she herself is not an I-O psychologist. So she was furious, thinking, you want to do what I do, my job is terrible, this is a bad idea, what happened to your neuroscience degree, etc. I think she's finally over it. It's been 10 years, but I think she's past it now. And yeah, so I came back to the US. I went to Hofstra. I did my master's there. Then I did my PhD. And I'm currently a talent strategy consultant at BTS, right? Strategy Made Personal. We're really on the people side of strategy. And the work is quite fun. I'll tell you that much. I sit in our talent assessments side of the organization. We have something like 30, 35 I/O psychologists globally. So I'm one of the rare cases of I/Os who work with other I/Os a lot. Although I would say I've been there for 4 years, I would say that's been different for perhaps the past year and a half or 2 years. I've kind of stepped outside and worked more with folks on the strategy alignment, innovation, business acumen, executive teams, and performance. So I've done quite a bit of work there that aligns with I/O psychology and falls very closely within our wheelhouse, but is outside talent assessment, right? No, I would say that the reason I went from the master's level to the doctoral level, and I know we might have a mix of students here on the call, maybe some folks who just graduated. The reason I did it is because my end goal is to teach. I love to teach. I go back to the most fulfilling job I had to date was when I was in undergrad. I was still a BME major, and I TA'd Gen Chem Lab 2. So the second Gen Chem Lab, and it was fantastic. There's nothing that has come even close, except when I was going through my doctoral training and I was teaching undergrad statistics. So I was a stats professor for a year, teaching statistics for the social sciences. So we covered descriptive stats. We went towards analysis of variance, so some inferential stuff after that, regression and the like, and it was fantastic. This was just after COVID. And it was a very weird time to be doing statistics or to just be in school in general. But I had a great time, and I think the students had also had a fulfilling experience. So that's why I went into it, my retirement plan. Now, reasons you might go into it, and I can assume that we might have some questions about this later on. I generally summarize it into two ways or two decisions, or three. One, like me, if you want to retire and teach, you need a doctoral level training if you're at a university, generally speaking. Two, if you want to go heavy quantitative. Right, so I have a number of friends who are now in people analytics, and the additional statistics training and research methods training will be to your benefit if you're going into the more quantitative sides of I/O. And then three, I would say, is if you want to be an academician, right? So if you want to be in academia, you want to be doing research, then the skill set that you develop as a doctoral student is one that's going to serve you very, very well. So those would be my big reasons. You can have your own, and I'm sure I didn't cover everything, but most of the folks that I talk to who have doctoral level training, like myself, like Anika on the call, it's because of one of those three reasons, but you'd have to decide for yourself. But okay, I want to save some time for us to do a bit of Q&A here, so I tried to keep it short. But Kale, Brianna, back over to you.
All right, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Good. Okay, perfect. Thank you all so much. Those were such great introductions. Very brief, so we're actually starting the Q&A pretty early. We're usually starting like a little after 6, so as far as time goes, we're doing really good. If anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute and jump in or send them in the chat. I wrote a couple of notes down, so if no one jumps in, I will start us off. So I'll give it about 10 awkward seconds, and then if no one says anything, I'll jump back.
I think I can start. So thank you everyone for your amazing introductions. It was so nice getting to learn, a little bit more about each and every one of you. So I have some questions, but I'll start with one for now. So it goes to Kareem. I'm an international student myself, from Cameroon originally.
Hey, big up yourself.
Sorry?
Big up yourself. It's something we say in Jamaica. You're fine.
Oh, okay. So I would like to know how your place of origin influences how you view I/O psychology, if at all. Being from a different country, living in a different country, and practicing IO psychology, does that play a role in how you view it or how you practice it?
Yes, absolutely. I will say that for one, I find that I am more sensitive or quicker to pick up on cultural differences between folks in the workplace, right? So, you know, as IO practitioners, we're always mindful of, let's say, individual difference. We can do the statistics and pull out the covariates that might explain why this subgroup is responding this way versus that way. So I think being international, just on an interpersonal level, I can pick up on things just a bit faster, perhaps, right? No, that's not enough for me to, you know, go to my managers and say, well, you know, I'm from Jamaica, so just trust me. I have this feeling, right? I have to show them the numbers. But I will say that it does help when you are trying to nurture relationships with folks who also feel out of place, right? Or with folks who are also from overseas or from other places. In terms of how it has affected kind of some of the research that I've done, there's one study that I didn't end up pushing through with it that I might someday, to be honest with you. Talking about not just it was racial and sex differences, right? Because I think of how something like diversity and inclusion is approached in the United States versus in Jamaica, where we are over 90% of African descent. Right? We're mostly West African. So when we talk about diversity in Jamaica, we're generally talking about gender differences in the workplace, sex differences in the workplace. And we're one of the countries where we actually have significantly more female managers than we have male managers, right? So our women have been essentially outperforming the men in the workplace for several years, right? So when I approach things like, you know, like diversity and inclusion and equity, and I recognize things, that space in general is very, I wouldn't say tumultuous, but it's more complex this year as opposed to in previous years for obvious reasons. But there has to be more of a, almost like a sensitivity, like a sensitive approach to these, not just for the sake of kind of one-to-one interactions, but for it to be captured in the work that we're doing, right? For us to be explaining meaningful differences between groups, between people, and then using those differences to predict or significantly predict outcomes, right? If you remember, one of the central mandates of our field is that work should be fulfilling. And to understand what's fulfilling for me and fulfilling for you is a big part of that.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. Thank you.
And if any of our other speakers want to like jump in to add to any of the answers, feel free to unmute. Answer away.
I think we have a good one in the chat here from Robert.
Okay, so the one from Robert says, it feels like business culture is monopolized by tech, data, product, and all things inanimate, and now, of course, AI. IO psychology seems to emphasize people and our interactions. Do you feel that you have to push back against cultures that emphasize tech and elevate people? If so, how are you doing that? Anyone that thinks they have an answer can go ahead and jump in.
I'll say that I don't push back. I actually teach people how to integrate technology and IO and AI into everything that they do. My company shifted because of my challenges with accessing capital and accessing technology. Software is extremely expensive. And when you're running an organization and starting an organization, and I'll say as an external consultant, because if you're an internal consultant, you're working within an organization, you're not taking all of that risk and wearing, you know, all of the business hat. But there are a lot of people out there who are external consultants, and especially the way that the workforce is now with subcontracting. And I don't know if you guys know that, but you need to do your homework. Subcontracting is the way that our consulting is going. A lot of organizations are no longer hiring full-time staff, and they are doing a lot of contract work. So when you're doing that, it's your responsibility to have the technology, to have the, you know, to close the learning curve. You've got to have the skills. There's nowhere for you to learn if you are external, so you got to learn it yourself. We actually own our own software for that reason. I was trying to learn how to use AI in my company because I didn't have the capital to hire more staff. And so we've learned how to use AI ethically. And so it actually gives us a competitive advantage by integrating it in our systems, our processes, our contracting, our invoicing, and all the things that we do. So there's this image that AI does one or two things, or that it's taking over or whatever, but there's so many tools out there, and there's so many ways to learn how to use technology in our field, but also that's what gives us the competitive advantage, over other industries. I hope that answered your question, Robert.
I'll go ahead and add to that as well. In my form of work, I work with like implementation and consultant advisory for a lot of companies that are trying to like improve the processes, and of course AI comes up all the time. And as Dr. Anika mentioned, that a lot of stuff is moving toward contractors as well, contract type work, which in contingent workforce, which I worked a good part of for like 4 to 5 years, for major companies like Google, Microsoft. I can agree. A lot of work is kind of going that way because they're limiting down a lot of full-time work, because AI can actually do a lot of administrative tasks type work, which actually eliminates a lot of contract work as well. So that's even the concept of what contract work looks like is going to be shifting around quite a bit in the next couple of years. One thing I try to do, though, I don't push back on companies that want to use AI, but I do ask them a couple questions that they need to self-reflect on. And one of them is what is this meant to fix in your organization? And is this going to help or not? And I make them kind of rethink those questions. Is like, are you implementing this just because your competitors are doing it, or is there a significant reason why that you want to streamline your process? And most of the time, they give me a complex answer about, or trying to explain. It's like, well, we want to do this and that and the other to bring on board our people faster. And sometimes they don't even need to add on all these extra features to it. So I try to make it simplified and let them a lot of companies realize that they don't actually need all the bells and whistles on their AI to do the work that they want it to do. But I'm not opposed to them actually doing it themselves. And a good example of this is like AI scoring in the ATS systems, the applicant tracking systems. There's a lot of misunderstandings that AI is auto rejecting people, and to be honest, it's not. To clarify that myth right now, what it does and the way it actually works is that AI scores resumes when when people apply to a job. Now, not all recruiters are actually confident about using that scoring system. They still have to look at it. They still have to respond to the candidate, or follow up with the hiring manager and shortlist it over. So why would you want to implement a tool that your own team doesn't want to use? That's kind of like one example of why, things that maybe AI may not be best at, including if there's no buy-in in the culture. So if none of your workers are actually using it, why implement it? And so that's one reason, one thing that I kind of like help companies understand better as far as like, is this necessary or is it not necessary? And like I mentioned, the subcontracting thing, a lot of things are kind of going toward that. But it also depends on your industry too. That can make a big change as well. As like a lot of things in tech, I would say, is all going to subcontracting. But things in like manufacturing and that, I think, is a bit of a slower maneuver in that area. So,
if I could just tack on one point here, I think you both handled the question swimmingly. My dissertation was on gamification. So how to use game elements to improve learning outcomes, whatever the outcomes are that you're looking for from an intervention. And the long and short of it, please don't search and read all 100+ pages. The long and short of it is gamification is not the answer to poor learning design, right? The same way AI isn't the answer to poor organizational design or poor process design. right? At BTS with our clients, we have conversations around AI all the time. As a matter of fact, we can recognize it's becoming table stakes for us at this point. It's almost like when word processors became popular. So if you wanted to get work done, you needed to know how to use Microsoft Word. You needed to know how to use Excel. So whatever proposal I write for new work with a client, or send anything out, it involves some element of AI, to be honest, showing you how we use it. But our approach internally, and what we really stress with our clients, is that AI is not all knowing, right? Treat it like a very smart intern. And oftentimes when people talk about AI, they're still talking about large language models, which is a bit of perhaps a reductive purview, but the LLMs have the most broadly applicable use cases, right? So if you are a strong manager, a strong people leader, then you imagine that you have a really smart intern, and the better instructions that you can formulate, the better parameters, the better guardrails you can put up, the better the outcome that you will get, right? So when folks want to go ahead and they're saying AI, tech, it's not so much that we are pushing back against hey, you shouldn't be using AI, and we outlined the use cases where they shouldn't, where it's not quite there yet, where it's not ethical, etc. But the elevation of people, to your question, Robert, goes hand in hand, right? Because if you are really so serious about pushing tech, you need to be pushing people as well, and that goes to almost like a cultural transformation within the organization, depending on how tech savvy, how comfortable folks are with taking on new technologies, as Joel mentioned earlier. Is that Seth with a hand up, I think?
Yes, I was just going to say thank you all so much for those answers. They were very in-depth. But Seth, if you want to unmute, you can go ahead and ask yours.
We're on a walk with Seth. I like it.
Yeah, I'm trying to stay healthy. So, okay, thanks to everyone. Thanks for taking the time and sharing all these insights. Here is an intentionally too simplistic question. As a consultant, let's say as an external consultant, is it better to be a generalist who kind of I do everything in I/O, or is it better to be a specialist who's like, I provide this service to this industry in this part of the country? Thanks.
Can you give a little more context, Seth? I'm sorry. Is like what I guess where in consulting, because it's a very broad area.
I agree, although I also know consulting firms that are like, we do everything. It's sort of like, especially in startup phases, they're like, what's your problem? Yes, we do that too. So I think I would say, like, for example, I might have a positioning statement that says, I do employee listening services for healthcare companies in the Northwest. That might be an example of being really specific or specific-ish. What would be the pros and cons to being that specific about what you do in marketing, networking, selling, etc.?
I can speak to this, Seth, because recently this week I decided to really, really hone down on our specialty. Since I started my business in 2018, I serve everybody and I do all the things, because I was taking my decades of work experience and saying, I know how to solve that problem. I know how to solve that problem. I had that problem. I had that problem. And in building my firm, I've gotten different kinds of certifications. People ask, what does a PHR, professional human resources, have to do with digital marketing certificate, have to do with leadership development PhD? And so we've been promoting all the things, right? And so when I was working with individuals, it was great because I was taking a business owner and I was able to create a strategic plan and then work on the different elements of their business in phases. Well, now that I'm doing government contracting, that's not cute. It became this thing where we have all of these NACE codes and we are looking at all of these bids and it became overwhelming. And then we're putting in for everything. And what I've learned is that there's certain things that I don't want to do. I know how to do it. I'm good at it, but I don't like it. And so my advice to you is to be a specialist, because the one thing that you will learn is that there's enough food out there for you to eat as a specialist. And you're also able to create your standard operating procedures. You're able to onboard staff. You're able to train your team and nurture your team, and you're able to be in your market and your field as a specialist in that field. When you are trying to do all the things, and for those large organizations, Seth, they probably do have teams that work in those specific areas that may cross train, but they're not necessarily all the people doing all the things. So it does matter your industry, the size, and all that. But my advice to you is that you are more efficient and proficient as a specialist.
I'll also mirror Dr. Anika there as well, in regards that being a specialist is much better than being a generalist, especially nowadays. Clients are now demanding more hyper specialized expertise over broad stroke advisory work. That's kind of what I do. I own my own business as well, and I'm a solopreneur, so I'm all by myself, and so I have to specialize in certain things with which is workforce planning in my area. I actually help out in some realms, including healthcare as well, in helping businesses understand or better understand their healthcare workers and how to better utilize them. I would also say though to find a sweet spot as well. In regards between generalists and specialists. And what I mean by that is a specialized generalist. That's another avenue that I actually recently learned myself, that you're not just a workforce management specialist, but if you're becoming an I-O psychology specialist, you can use that to work across workforce domains if that's the area you want to get into, that's different and more valuable. It also allows you to do more deep I-O psychology foundation work, and most workforce consultants don't have this. Trust me, I talk to a lot of them, and you can apply these principles across different industries. So just to kind of emphasize, what Dr. Anika said, I would say specialist as well.
Seth, I have a bit of a different answer for you from Anika and Joel, largely because I'm coming from the angle where I don't have my own consulting firm, right? So I am employed by a larger talent strategy firm, right? And that will inform why I say one way or the other. Now, my bread and butter is talent assessment. That's what I started my internship at BTS. That's why I'm a senior consultant there now doing all of this, right? Now, when you are employed by a consulting firm, you know that within your firm, you have talent assessment over here, you have innovation over here, you have change and transformation over here. Let's pick a client. Google does not know that. Google just sees you and says you're a BTS consultant, right? Now, in professional services, the primary kind of business driver that you're really pushing for is just generating revenue, right? I know Joel had a beautiful equation in the chat here. Your I-O knowledge plus business acumen equal consulting gold. So if I'm on an elevator and I meet someone from Google, we strike up a conversation, we start talking about BTS, my firm, I could go down the rabbit hole about talking about talent assessment because that's what I do. But if this Googler starts telling me about some issue that they need some change and transformation type work, which is also within the I-O realm, right? But let's say it's something outside my realm, something like more financial acumen, development, strategy alignment, etc. Right? If they go down that avenue, I need to be able to navigate that space, right? I need to know just enough to be dangerous, is what we say at BTS. I need to know enough that I can take that conversation, move it to the next level. I can go back to my senior, like principals, partners, whoever, and say, hey, you're a big strategy person. I met this Googler that's looking for help. We talked about this. Can you jump on this next call with me to have that conversation, right? So I am kind of a generalist. I don't know if I'm the specialized generalist, as Joel said. I don't think I'm quite as developed just yet. But in my context, as someone employed by a consulting firm, it's kind of what you mentioned earlier. If there's a problem that has been presented, you start there, right? And then you know your business and your environment well enough that you can piece together loosely what could be a workable direction. You're not building a solution just yet. You're still in the elevator having this conversation, but you need to know what to say, the questions to ask, so that you can have a follow-up conversation and then see where that goes, right? So generally in consulting firms, let's say, whether it be BTS, whether it be McKinsey, EY, MBB, and any of those bigger consulting firms as well, or KPMG, Accenture, your ability to generate revenue is paramount, right? It's tied to their compensation model. It's tied to your, the rate of your upward mobility as well, right? So while you are a strong I/O psychologist, whoever you're talking to, you might mention you're an I/O or you might not. The first thing they might ask is where you work. So if you're at KPMG, you're going to talk to them as if you work at KPMG because you do, right? And that involves the domains outside of I/O. That's not to say that you will be the one working on those projects outside of I/O. You don't have that expertise, but you need to know enough to connect the dots and then bring the team, the other specialists on the other side to have that conversation. And your ability to do that comes with your ability to, as I said, navigate your organization and navigate the industry or space that you operate within. So it's a yes and to Anika and Joel's points. I think all of the above is true. Theirs is definitely more applied to when you own a business. I want to be like them someday. But where I am now, it helps me to be, to be dangerous in spaces outside of the I/O realm.
I love it. Those are all such great answers. Seth said he loves the nuance. There is another question in the chat from Petra. She says, what is something that you wish you'd known earlier on / done differently when you started your consulting business?
I wish I was gonna be avoiding like 3 layoffs before I started my own business. So that's something I wish I had known. But also, I kind of wish I had expanded my network more too when I began it, and gotten to know I/O psychologists more in alignment with my field and staffing in other areas too. That's something I kind of neglected for a long time before I started my own business, and then only in the recent last 2 years have I actually been reaching out, connecting, talking to people of higher or my level or higher in I/O psychology, and learning from them and getting some tips and ideas and what they've done in consulting practices and organizational design. So my biggest advice to people would be make sure you're networking all the time.
I concur. And for me, I was afraid of being an executive coach or a consultant. I enjoyed working one-on-one because it allowed me to be safe and like work on an individual level, because I thought I wasn't as good as the other people that have been doing it for years and years. What I learned is the majority of people that are consultants had a different career first. So that's why I said, no matter what your experience is, it's applicable. It doesn't matter if it was waitressing, retail, whatever you learned. Consulting is people and processes. And so solving problems with people and processes, you can learn that anywhere. So my advice to you is, when you start your own firm or working for others, don't be afraid to do the scary things. I'm in a season now of doing everything that scares me. I got my federal certifications. I didn't want them. Everybody else was doing them a year ago and was like, you can keep playing one-on-one with the individual coaching and all that, but this is where it's at. And so I just got to a place where I was like, okay, there has to be more. Don't be afraid to put yourself in spaces where you can learn from others. I'm gonna give you my liberty leadership theory. The theory that I developed in my dissertation is L, liberty. L, learn from others. That means network. That means follow somebody on YouTube that's doing what you want to do. That means download things that they provide you with free resources. Do the workbooks, the reflective processing. Learn from the people who are doing what you want to do, and don't be afraid to book a session or a meeting with them and ask them the questions that you want answers to. Fear is the only thing holding you back from success, and that was something that I did for far too long. I is industry specific resources. No matter what industry you're in, no matter what your subcategory of consulting or I/O is, there's something out there that you need to know. Join that club, join that professional organization or association. One way that you can do that without having to pay is volunteer for their conferences. Normally they will take students and they will, pay for your conference ticket if you volunteer and sit at the registration desk. You also learn who is who in the market when you do those things. B is belonging and justice. Find a safe space that you're comfortable in, that you're comfortable asking the questions, that you're comfortable being around the people in those spaces and operate in those spaces. E is expertise, education, and experience. No matter what your education is and your experience, you put them together and you go out there and you teach somebody something. That is the only way to build your confidence. R is resources. So you have your industry specific resources, but the other resources are the overwhelming world of the internet and BNI club groups and different places where you can get information. Books is extremely important for you to read and do Audible. T is the transformation. If you are really wanting to be a consultant, you have to get rid of the employee mindset, because there is no way for you to have an employee mindset and to be an entrepreneur or a consultant. You have to get your mind right about money. You have to get your mind right about being a leader. You have to get your mind right about telling somebody something that they don't want to hear, and also potentially being the enemy at times. And then Y is yield. Surrender to the field that you chose and wake up being afraid and exuberated at the same time every single day.
Can I tack on a sentence here as someone who does not have a consulting business? I'll take it, Petra, as what's something I wish I'd known or done differently when I started consulting. So I'll take it from there. I love how you just spelt out the different parts of liberty there. I definitely gonna ask you, like, follow up with you on that, just to make sure I have all of the letters down as well. I think for me, and this is probably conversations you'll have with your other professors in graduate school, is just the value of business acumen again, right? It can't go, it can't be stressed enough. I know Joel mentioned it earlier. When you are in consulting as an I-O practitioner, folks will often, like, very readily look at you. They hear I-O psychology and they think something therapeutic, right? They think you're very fieldsy. They think, you work with people, and we are in a sense, right? But you need to be able to stress your quantitative skills and also be able to connect your decisions around people, around org design, around org change, to the vision of the organization and how it's generating revenue, right? Because every business is in the business of making money, every single one. And with that comes a level of business acumen that, at least I'll speak for my program, we didn't get developed as thoroughly as you would. I'm not going to say assume. The reality is you're not going to learn everything inside the classroom. It's going to be on you to learn everything that you don't, right? But when you are, let's say you're going to people analytics, if you are competing with your peers who went to B school, business school, they got MBAs, for instance, your edge will be talking about the people. You might be maybe as quantitatively trained. If you get a doctoral level degree, you'll be a little stronger. But their edge will be connecting it back to the business drivers, the key metrics, right? We talk about employee satisfaction. We talk about churn and retention. They will talk about revenue. They will talk about EBITDA. They will talk about operating income, bottom lines, top lines, everything. So to understand that lingo and to be able to draw the connection between your people strategy, your org strategy, whatever, kind of sub-lane of I-O psychology you're discussing, with the ability of your client to make money, the stronger you will be. So if there's one thing I will say, it's the business acumen will go a far way. And there are a number of places where you can close that gap. I used Udemy as one thing, and also just like working in consulting, it will strengthen over time. But like learn how to read a P&L, an income statement, right? They're published on the earnings page of every organization. This is if you are in a consulting firm, right? Understanding, oh, they did revenue this much this year, they had this acquisition, etc., which informed how much they put towards L&D, and you'll just get better at it over time. Until it becomes one of the skills in your tool belt, right? So if you can connect those dots for yourself over time, then you will definitely be better at working within someone else's consulting firm, I guess. Oh gosh, the more I talk about this, I feel like I need to just go off on my own. I might talk to you both, get some tips afterwards. I'm talking about working for other people, and it's like, this isn't as fun as I thought it was, but it's okay.
Does anyone else have any additional questions? I have one kind of lighthearted one, but if anyone has anything else, just chime in real quick. Again, I'll give it the 10 awkward seconds and then I'll hop in.
I've got one actually, and it was set up by something that you said, Kareem, where you said you're lucky enough to work with many other IO
Yeah.
psychologists at your consulting firm. But in the past sessions, it's a common theme that many of our speakers are the only IO psychologists in their organization, and they're the only one that they talk to. So I want to mostly ask about like what are some major differences between like internal and external consultants? Like internal, where a non-IO company hires you to do all of their organizational stuff, versus external, where you work at a firm with like-minded people who know similar things about the field. What are some skills that are important in each aspect, stuff like that?
Yeah, so pros of working somewhere where there are a bunch of IOs. We all talk about how we're going to go to SAT together. That's one. We try to, publish and submit, and we work very closely together. You always have an expert that you can like bounce ideas off of. Likewise, I have clients who are also IO psychologists, and there's just way less resistance when we're talking details about the measures that we're using, or, we're trying to preempt some of the like some of the items that we're developing on a 360, or, like the reactions to them, etc. You're talking the same language, so things move by a lot more quickly, right? I think perhaps some of the cons of that is if you stay within your IO bubble, you tend to keep talking about IO stuff. And, if your career pathing is towards, let's say, CHRO, Chief People Officer, Chief Learning Officer, then that might be okay. But as I mentioned before, you need to be learning stuff that is outside our field, right? You need to be getting more comfortable with the business metrics, or the financial drivers, with all of that kind of stuff. You're working with folks who aren't IOs, you're then in a position where you're getting to absorb some of that stuff, right? You're learning stuff outside of what you would have captured in your degree program. But you're also, unfortunately, having to explain something that might seem second nature to you at this point, right? So I really don't want to spend minutes on a meeting going over why we can't make this 360 item double-barreled. Like, it's just, we all know it's a bad idea, but if to someone who isn't really thinking along those lines, that the perspective might be, well, it rounds out the statement, it's much more thorough, people get a clear understanding, and it's like, I get that, but you're asking two different things in the same question. So we just lose time doing even some of the more fundamental things like that. When you're working with IOs, you get to skip it all, right? Granted, as you develop your expertise, like, clients will learn from you, and they'll start leveraging, they'll trust your judgment. But there are definitely pros and cons to it, I guess. Like the IOs that I see kind of climbing, not towards CHRO, but perhaps, like starting their own businesses. The IOs that I see kind of setting up their own departments within organizations. Like I think of an alumnus of the same doctoral program I went to, Randy Lim. He just left McKinsey. He pretty much started their external facing people analytics function, right? Those IOs are the ones that are kind of stepping outside the IO space and understanding, like, this is what the business needs, right? And understanding those drivers that I mentioned before. So pros and cons to both sides.
I'll say, so my company has been just me for 7 years, and now I have subcontractors, and finally have an employee, and we'll have another soon. Most of us are IO psychologists. However, we all have different backgrounds and we have different specialties. So I have one who's actually on the call, who she's got AI website background, but she has a banking background before coming to IO. And then we have someone else who has a PhD in IO, who has a similar background with human services, probation, parole, also was in the National Guard. So she brings military experience. We have a bunch of subcontractors who were clinical psychologists who are now transitioning to consulting, which is great for us because we do leadership development trainings for different states and organizations, and we need DISC certified people. We need, motivational interviewing. There's needs that we have for our contracting where I have to go out and find subcontractors. So it's really, really fun when we have our calls because we have one person who is not an IO at all and not a psychologist, and she is our contract manager. And she says we're a bunch of cats. and we get on the call and she's trying to keep us together. But we have all of these ideas, all these backgrounds, because IOs, we can go here, we can go there. But she's also there to make sure that when we're doing our contracts, that our language is for laypersons, because we do have to bring it back. And so to what Kareem was saying, there is a time and place, and for us sometimes we're so comfortable in our little realm that we have to bring it back to the outside. And my husband just retired out of the Marines after 29 years, and I told him he will also be a contract person because I need his brains, because I said the military speaks Japanese and he's our translator. So when it's coming to contracting and things like that, and when you're transitioning, you will need people with different hats. And so it's really important that you have a diverse team with different perspectives, different backgrounds. Even if it is an IO, we have different specialties, but we're also all around the country. Some are in Ohio, Connecticut, California. And so even when we're doing contracting, training, anything, we can deploy people in different areas of the country. So even if you're, internal, external, you want to make sure that you're staying familiar with different industries and positioning yourself, even if you're going to different conferences. Like I like to go to AI conferences, tech conferences. I'm going to a pharmaceutical conference that I'm speaking at. When they ask, can you speak about leadership or AI? Absolutely. Do I know anything about pharmaceuticals? Only what I know from being in healthcare as case manager. But you can apply your knowledge and skills anywhere. And that's how you continue to grow and maintain your competitive advantage.
I know that we kind of touched a little bit on this, but Yolanda asked in the chat whether people prefer internal versus external consulting. I don't know if y'all wanted to add to any of your answers to address that specifically.
The main reason why I'm external is because when I left my last job, my boss called me a name and I promised I would never work for anybody else. So it has nothing to do with experience. It had to do with being abused at work. And so one of the reasons I became an entrepreneur, and the reason I teach people entrepreneurship, is because I was a single mom at a time, and I almost lost many jobs for my kid missing the school bus or needing to be there for my kids. So autonomy is extremely important for me. And so I have to find other ways to gain experience that I otherwise would learn being internal. I have to kind of put myself out there, pro bono work, different things. You find ways to get skills and access to people. But for me, it's a personal choice and a promise that I made to myself. And it's hard to keep because you guys can fight me, but to me, it's easier to work for somebody else than to run your own company. And there are days when I wish that I could pack it all up and not cry if I let it go. But it's a personal preference and a personal promise. So nothing to do with the field or anything like that, but just a promise I made to myself.
I do miss working internal sometimes. Sometimes I found myself lying awake at night thinking about it. But I also feel like I love being on my own too. And I love external consulting in that regards. Much the same reasons Dr. Anika had is regards to abuse of workers. And sometimes in staffing, it can be really ridiculous too. Especially if we're doing implementations of projects that they want things done the client want things done yesterday. And of course, the staffing firms that I work with would always be like, well, how high do you want us to jump? And so that's kind of why I went on my own too, is like I got tired of seeing how high I could jump. And now I work with clients that actually want to do change. And instead of like the large complex organizations that they handle, I do more like small to medium-sized businesses. But I like to take time off every so often. I don't feel I need to be online 24/7 to get the work done. In fact, I can get the work done a lot faster if I'm not pressured to do it. So in that regards, that's why I like working on my own. It's a lot extra work in trying to find clients and acting as a salesperson on top of being an I/O psych practitioner, but there's also great moments too where it's I don't feel like working on this right now. I can put it off to the side, take a nap, come back and do it later, versus internally where I'd be monitored and be like, why are you not online, Joel? It's well, I ate something and I took a nap because I'm tired and I'm in my 40s. So that's kind of the benefits. So there are pros and cons to it, but I personally prefer I like working externally. So
If I could maybe round out the discussion, when I think of internal and external, I appreciate the perspectives from you both. Are we describing internal within an organization where you are, let's say, your title is consultant, but you work for Uber, versus I work at a consulting firm and I work with other clients? Because I know there are kind of two ways to think about internal consulting versus external. Internal, in the way that was just described by Joel and Anika, would be, you know, you have your consulting firm and then you're managing with other clients. External, in my case, would be I am at a consulting firm managing other clients, and internal would be I leave, let's say, my current employer and I go to another organization and I just consult with them, right? So there are two different ways to kind of approach it. I have been like a L&D consultant on contract, actually, talking about the contractor conversation from earlier, for a year as a previous, I think it was a God, what do we even call that space? Like an education technology company, education technology. And in that case, internal was coordinating with the legal team, with our educators, with our advisors, etc., on like large scale trainings internally. So the same thing that I would do for a client externally, with the exception that I am now only working with this singular, it's not a client, my employer, right? So I'm doing the same thing for them only, and it's kind of, they point you in a direction and say, hey, this is the problem, can you kind of figure it out? And then you develop your solution there, as opposed to going out finding clients or getting staffed on projects where a client has already decided or determined the problem has perhaps been a bit more described or explained, and then you tackle it there. So two different ways to go about it. If you're internal, maybe you feel more comfortable working with folks, you know, like a frequently, the same people frequently, as opposed to going out finding new clients. Maybe you're not as comfortable with delivery, like speaking in front of new people like every other day. You know, you implement something, then you move on to another client or move on to a new project, and you don't necessarily always get to see the outcomes if you're staffed elsewhere. If you're internal, then you don't have that same, you don't necessarily are in that same position. You get to see things end to end, perhaps more frequently than if you're external. Although you do get to do it there. Like you run a pilot this year, then do it again next year, then next year, and you keep getting to improve those programs. But it just depends on the kind of engagement that you're on, and then once again, how you define internal versus external.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for answering all of those questions. And everyone asked such great questions today. Thank you all so much to our speakers, Joel, Anika, and Kareem. I really, really appreciate you being here and being willing to share your insight and your experiences. In the chat, I sent my LinkedIn, Kale's LinkedIn, and then the Houston I-O Psychology Network link. Kale and I were talking right before the session. I'm going to make a LinkedIn page for us instead of just having the LinkedIn group. That way we can share resources and make connections and build relationships and things like that. A common theme as far as everyone's insights and advice goes at every single one of these sessions has been to network and build relationships. So I'm really hoping that early career professionals and grad students will really hang on to that and start connecting with each other. I know a lot of our speakers have opened themselves up and given their information, like, hey guys, if you have questions, please reach out to me. If y'all have any questions for me specifically, feel free to send me a message on LinkedIn. Everyone who has been a speaker, everyone's LinkedIn's and information is in the detail section of those events. So yeah, if that's it, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. Kale, do you have anything to add?
No, not really. Thank you guys all so much for coming. I think you guys all had really great insights and everything. So really appreciate it. Great to have the perspective too of both, you know, a large consulting firm and an independent sort of practitioner, kind of the two paths for consulting. So yeah, appreciate it, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you all so much.
Absolutely.